Well, okay then. It looks like we are live for episode 48 of Space Rocks Uplink. What an exciting moment. And in just a moment, we're going to bring Mark McCorkran on. Okay, here we go. He is joining now.
Good evening, Alex.
Mark, how are you doing? What a pleasure to see you. And I got to say, I think you've outdone yourself in your Zoom background. Right?
Well, somebody did tell me that it was World Bee Day, so I thought, well, I've got to be in the mix here with World Bee Day. So, but actually, if only I can control my my bad dad jokes.
Yeah, let's be honest, Mark. I think that's the worst joke. That's fine.
But it is pretty bad so far, isn't it? Yeah,
it's absolutely brilliant. Well, it's not B Day today, but it's B Day to clarify. It's World B Day. So indeed.
Well, let's see. Maybe, just maybe, I can be prepared for that. All right, there we
Fantastic. Go. No, it's
what I seem to be unprepared for, however, is getting some sound out of my system in the right place. So keep talking amongst yourselves.
Okay.
Well, 10 seconds.
Very good. Well, I think we'll count to 10. And welcome everybody who's joined us from all over the world. Mark, as ever, what is wonderful about what we do with Space Rocks is that we always meet new people along the way, not just our guests, but also people who join to find out what we're all about, which is a really lovely thing as well. And I suppose in light of that, we should probably ask you to introduce yourself. Say a little bit about what you do at ESA.
Indeed. Well, I think this evening I'm going to take these off because I've got myself somehow in a loop, but as long as there's no feedback from your side, is that okay?
Yep, that's just
good. Yeah, well, look, thanks very much, Alex, and sorry for the slight technical hiccup as well as the dad joke. As you can see from the polo shirt I'm wearing today, I work for the European Space Agency, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Science and Exploration. It means I do the job I did earlier on today, which is give talks about all of the scientific results coming from our missions in the solar system, studying the planet, studying the sun, but also those looking out into the rest of the universe. So I gave a talk today to one of our advisory committees, and that's something which is an important component of communicating what we do. But then so is this, things like space rocks and communications, engaging with the public much more directly, but also bringing in people who are interested in what we do in space, and we're interested in what they do in their cultural and other technical fields, and having discussion and having a dialogue.
Indeed. Well, I mean, it's an important thing to bring worlds together, certainly. And I suppose that's what Space Rocks is all about. And as for tonight's guest, it really is about, I think, what's a very consistent intersection, which is creative fields and science and innovation. I mean, what can we say about Imogen Heap beyond the music? Because there's so much about her life and her work outside of the music as well that I think we would love to explore tonight. Because, well, I guess it involves a lot of things that we're talking about very much these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I may have found the technical solution to my problems. Let's see. How are you doing? Can I hear you now?
I can hear you.
That's very good. So that's much better. Yes, and indeed, technology lies very much at the heart of what Imogen does with the music and beyond the music. So people perhaps will know that she's been involved in endeavors to do with wearable technology. So using effectively sort of using instruments directly and using her hands through gloves which can sense the movement of her hands, and we'll talk about that. How does that free you up from sort of conventional music making, for example, but also more recently things to do with blockchain and NFTs, things which are very much in the public sphere, but not often quite so much with music, but often to do with other forms of technology and record keeping, and of course linked to cryptocurrencies. So love to explore how Imogen is using those in the context of her music life, and also supporting artists who maybe don't have major labels behind them. How can they use these technologies to make sure that their work is secure and also to promote themselves in an increasingly digital environment?
Indeed. Well, it's a lot of big questions. I think that there is a lot to talk about. So without further ado, I think we'll bring Imogen in. And how fantastic that we're actually talking about technology just as we had a technical glitch. I guess it's like we scripted that too.
Well, I wish it was a glitch. It's my stupidity. Evening, Imogen. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Very good. We got the bad dad joke out of the way about World Bee Day.
I did hear it.
Sorry, but
that's okay. I thought it's quite good. So I must be an old mum.
My daughter egged me on, and my wife just shook her head at me, and so
you can't win, can you?
Indeed. But there are alternatives to fighting. I suppose. Imogen, what an absolute pleasure it is to have you here, and we have so much to talk about. And we never really structure these conversations, but we always try to start with a big framing question. And I was thinking about what to begin with tonight. And I guess the best one may be, why do you think it is that music and technology seem to consistently make such comfortable bedfellows? Why is it that music seems to do so much to drive innovation?
Wow, I guess music is a food for life. So if it's not working in its current environment, it's striving to find another way to reach us, another way to make life easier, maybe from the musician side, but also to make it easy for those to just enjoy music in their everyday. Then that's where technology is at its best, isn't it? Where it's seamless, where it just becomes part of life, and you don't really see it anymore. So perhaps that's why it's always wants to be on the cutting edge, but it is hard sometimes to make it on the cutting edge if there are organisations that like it where it is, shall we say. So, but I really enjoy this space. I guess my first explorations in music and technology was the piano, this incredible piece of technology that I grew up around. But yeah, I've always felt like technology was my friend, and it's such a playful, exciting space in that new development space. Much more fun than getting frustrated with whatever it is that you're frustrated about the music industry.
Mm-hmm. So I guess at some point the people, when the piano first came in, there were clavichord players and harpsichord players who said, burn the witch, you can't play one of those, and then we kind of moved to the full orchestra, which we tend to take now as a completely static thing, but of course has evolved dramatically over the years. But then electronics came in, and so in thinking about your glove technology, the MI.MU technology, of course it has a sort of precursor, in my mind at least, in the theremin, moving through electromagnetic fields. So where did that idea come to you of using wearable technology?
Actually, there was a pow moment that happened, but previous to that, there was the need for it was just, I felt like I was going back and forth between lots of equipment on stage. I was trying my best to make the live side of the electronic side, the kind of the gear side of my stage show, feel more spontaneous to me by putting kind of sensors around the stage. So I'd have like a box or a square plate that I would stand on to press record, and then when I got off it would press play, and I would have little things dotted around the stage so that I didn't have to always return back to base station to record a loop. I suppose the intermediate stage was these lapel microphones that I attached to my wrists because I saw this, I think it was Thomas Bloch, a crystal bashir player who was he was playing the glass harmonica, so just wine glasses essentially, and he had this neat trick of how to mic up a wine glass, which is to put a microphone there, because that's exactly where the sound comes, is where your hand is moving. So he would have them attached to his hands, and I was like, that is genius, I'm going to put that on stage. So I'd stuck these lapel mics to my stage, and I would run around and recording different instrumentalists on the stage and recording my voice in stereo. But then it was like, but I wish I could just record. And it was when I went to the MIT Media Lab and I came across this amazing lady called Ellie Jessup, and she was developing a system called the VAMP system. And somebody called Kelly Snook invited me into this day, which actually I don't think I was really meant to be there. It was more like a day for funding, for people funding the MIT Media Lab, and I really wasn't meant to be there. So, but I didn't know that. I thought I was invited and everything's fine. But when I got there, they were kind of sneaking me around, just like, oh, don't, quick, he's over there, like, go away. Anyway, so I met Ellie, and Kelly knew that I would love what she was doing. So what I realized in seeing her technology, it was a glove, and what I saw was this. Her hand, she was singing, and then she would make this gesture, and when she did that, a tiny sliver of sound was then synthesized into a tone, and then she did this with her hand and made a vibrato effect, so it oscillated, and my head just went ka-chow, because I was like, this is it, you can actually wear gloves to do this stuff. Why didn't I think about that? I was like thinking about things to put on my body, just never occurred to me to use an actual pair of gloves. So I was so excited and inspired, and I desperately wanted to work with her, but she was working on stuff with Todd McIver, and it was not Todd McIver. No, that's not right. Is that right? Todd McIver. Anyway,
we can get on Google. You keep talking.
MIT Media Lab. I should know that. And it just wasn't possible to work with her on it. So I went home a bit deflated, and called up the only person I knew, Tom Mitchell, and I just said, I want to make music with gloves. What can we do? So he was like, okay. And he called up, he had a word with the University of West England, got £10,000 to buy a couple of pairs of 5DT gloves, which are fibre optic gloves, off the shelf, and just started hacking away and developing our first neural network. Well, he did, I did none of that. Developing the first neural network to recognize postures. And that was the first iteration of the gloves. And then about a year later, we started, very quickly after that, we started sticking sensors onto it and working with another guy called Seb Madrick, who's now in our team, Sensor Seb, as we call him, as I call him. And then started to stick other bits and bobs around it. And before we knew it, it looked like this kind of Frankenstein hand thing with loads of wires. And then we needed to bring somebody in to make it, customize that so that we could have a wearable glove with integrated technology. And that was Hannah Perner-Wilson. We kind of gradually accumulated this amazing team, and 10 years on, we have this incredibly versatile tool, which we now do, which other people can now buy. And we have a few hundred glovers in the world, and they interface with our software glover, which you can also use with other things like the Leap Motion little device that you can, put postures over and get height and width and and your iPhone as well, you can use with our thing called Bliss. So it's fun. It's super fun. And that was my first explorations into first realization that there were these people out there called makers who made stuff, and it didn't have to be done in a laboratory. There were people at home with kit that could just make stuff out of your imagination. And before that, I'd never been exposed to that world. Before MIT Media Lab, actually, it was always what was off the shelf, and it was deeply frustrating because it was not there what I wanted. It's been a fun project that has emerged now into something that other people can use, and it's great.
Somebody that's been very much in the news recently, I think it was a TV program a couple of days ago, I've recorded it, I haven't watched it, it was Delia Derbyshire from the Radiophonic Workshop, who's sort of belatedly been given credit for the work that she did on the Doctor Who theme, but did so much else. And again, I'm sort of wondering, in a way, I'm not saying what the glove system is now old tech by any means, but you were 10 years ahead of time. I mean, now I can pick up my phone and make music and use the accelerometers and change things. But do you feel, is there somewhere else to go now? I mean, in that sense, what's next in that regard?
Yeah, there's so many places to go. It's that kind of, you get to a point, like with the gloves, we got to a point about, 3 or 4 years in, where it's like, I'm doing the thing, I'm making the sound with the recording, and I'm moving the sound around, and I'm adding reverbs to my voice, and it's so incredible. And they're like, and now I want to do this thing. And then there's like 3 more years of development to do that thing. So you're always like, the minute you reach that point of, oh, this is what I thought it was, then you go like, oh, no, it's not, it's this thing. And you're like, you're always kind of living in the future, never really satisfied with the thing that you've developed to get to that point. There's always one thing, the next peak. This is what's exciting about that space as well, is that gestural interfacing, gestural language will emerge, some kind of global gestural language where we interface with our computers and our technology to emancipate us from our keyboards and our hunched over, evolved selves, so that we can be free to be expressive and be wherever we want to be to do that. So I think inevitably the gloves will just become, the physical gloves will become redundant, and you'll just have a camera or whatever the future is, heat sensors, I don't know, air sensors, that will just define where you are and what detailed motions you're doing, or it's a brain implant in the future. So just some, but there isn't that right now. So this is our kind of, this is our way in, and really the jewel in our crown is the software, is the kind of where the brain, where we connect the imagination with the technology that's off the shelf, actually, with things like Ableton or Macs or OSC MIDI devices, MIDI software that you can interface with. So it's trying to create the flexibility. It's like trying to create the patch bay, like you're the operator of all the technology that's out there, and all the in the hardware space or in the human space, and then the software inside your devices, and then it's that bridge in between that we're really interested in. So yeah, lots to explore.
I mean, it's a fascinating concept. I mean, it immediately reminded me of the sort of things that I see in science fiction films, like Minority Report, for instance. That gestural stuff where you're just moving screens around and so on, and it does feel very sci-fi. I mean, perhaps linked. Well, Mark mentioned theremins, but also like things like just dance and body movements and people doing things that feel or look very natural to them, very organic, and that's what's so interesting about what you have done. But I wonder if we could just sort of trace back, not from just a few years ago, but what was your first exposure to that kind of innovation? I mean, because was it music first, or was it gadgetry? I mean, how did these things convalesce for the first time in your life?
I really kind of lived quite a myopic view. I had a myopic view of the music industry world, making records, quite straight down the line, did lots of touring. I mean, I produced my own records, but other than that, I wasn't like developing software or, reverb devices, or I was just kind of getting whatever was off the shelf. I never really got under the hood. And I still don't know myself how to get under the hood, like I can't code and things like that. So just work with amazing people who can. So I suppose that really was my first interaction. Actually, no, previous to that, the only thing that I realized, it was with Tom Mitchell again. He helped me program a monome, this kind of like a board with lots of different patches on it, all the same, really pretty thing. And I wanted to use it to customize how I played the drums and how I pressed record. So I didn't have a massive laptop that I was typing on Letterman, because I had this David Letterman opportunity. And I was like, okay, I want to play the piano and I want to have this thing on my lap and I want to just make music. But really before that, I just wasn't aware of the possibility that you could do these things. I mean, I'd seen, Minority Report, obviously, and lots of sci-fi movies, but I didn't realize it was so close until I saw somebody do it for real. And now obviously I discover there's a huge, obviously, decades of technology that I never got to see because I just didn't know where to look, and it wasn't in my space, which was, record label initially at 17, signing to like your typical worst awful record deal, and then doing stuff around film and TV, and then branching out in that way, and then always kind of working in interesting ways with my fans, doing projects, and then funding my own little label. But yeah, it was Kelly really who reached out, who just knew I'd be interested in it, and she actually came to work with me eventually. She was originally with NASA. She was with NASA, and then she was at MIT as a what was she doing? She was sonifying the solar system, as you do, and then she wanted to come work with me. So I was like, okay, if you're crazy and want to come work with me instead of working at NASA, come by my weird little house in the countryside and let's do stuff. So So actually, there's a lot of credit goes to Kelly for bringing me into that space.
So when, I mean, good, of course, you've moved on in other ways into sort of different ways of interacting with the digital space beyond the music as well. But before we go there, I'm sort of curious to know whether this has enabled you to find new music. I mean, we recently had Vangelis on, famous keyboard player, and he has his own huge machine that over years he's built up and programmed, and it sounds like him. I mean, in the best possible way. It allows him to express himself, but it sounds like him. Have you found new sounds, or has it just made it more convenient to do things you wanted to do anyway?
I actually don't make that much music at the moment. I always find myself going back into the same old sounds, which really annoys me. I wish I'm very like, I've got all these different projects and I feel a bit like I'm not doing any of them really well. But I'm just kind of scratching the surface and pushing this bit here and that over there. And I'm quite flighty in a way. Every now and then I like really focus and I do something. But I am deeply inspired by Holly Herndon. And more recently on her podcast that I've discovered, Interdependence, that she's with Matt Dryhurst. And so I know that there's like so much to explore. And one of the things that I would love to help develop is how potentially, your AI assistant might discover music for you, outside of your bubble, inside of your bubble, to help me navigate the enormous space of new music, because there's a new track every second. There's two new songs every second or something uploaded into the space.
With a heavy degree of sarcasm, I'm going to say, doesn't Spotify do that for you already?
No. So little music actually gets onto Spotify, and of course, the algorithms are maybe biased. But yeah, I'm excited about how AI kind of developing my own AI. Actually, that's why I'm in this chair, to help me navigate this future space, because I feel like I'm not getting the best out of what's out there in my lifetime. I worry that how am I going to discover all this great stuff that's alive and people are alive in my time when I don't have the time to even make dinner for my child. So I'd like to start developing. Well, I am starting to very, very, very softly starting to develop that for myself.
So in broadcast terms, this is what you would call a segue. So I'm going to do it now.
Okay.
So what can you tell us about where you're seated? Right. We heard something on the line check, and it's absolutely fascinating. Please.
Cool. So this is called the listening chair, and you can't see it right now, but it's like a classic egg chair. And in it, about 10 years ago, my team and some students from the what's the name of it? Oh my goodness, this is awful. My brain. I'll remember it later. Anyway, sorry. They developed this with me, and Moritz Waldemeier led the team. And we basically butchered this egg chair to put speakers in it, a tablet, a microphone, a light, and we've added some extra things into it. And the initial idea was to gather ideas from people around the world to see if there was one song that still needed to be written. And I was kind of hoping for like some overarching, thread across all humans that we came across. But no, there wasn't that. It actually kind of segmented quite nicely into every 7 years, different people started to be curious about different things. And so it inspired me to write this song called The Listening Chair, where every minute of the song represents 7 years of my life. And it will only be finished when I'm dead. But I haven't written the last 7 years. Because it's been a bit crazy and I just haven't had the time to do it. But I didn't think about that when I wrote it 7 years ago. So anyway, the listening chair now, after having gathered all that great crowdsourced material from all those people who, gave their precious time to it, is now the early beginnings of explorations into a personal AI, because I don't like repeating myself, I guess, and I want to help anyone, whether it's a journalist or a machine or anyone that they need something from me and they don't want to like have it in data form, because that might be something called the creative passport, but in a conversational form. So we are developing slowly every Thursday. I get into this chair and I have discussions with my fans, and they ask me questions that aren't already in the chair as an answer. Sorry, in the I call it Imogen, like augmented Imogen. In this, essentially a chatbot at the moment. You ask it a question, and if it knows the answer, then Imogen will answer you. And if it doesn't know the answer, then it will direct you to get a ticket to ask me in person. So I've had hundreds of conversations in the chair, and I try to keep my answers succinct, but you probably realize that that's impossible. So we quickly realized that was impossible. So now what we've done is we have this huge body of like question and answer videos, and we have a camera which is detecting my emotional responses so that we can contextualize the text from the audio. And then we are kind of condensing that for the chatbot form to be able to answer questions. But it's the way that we're condensing that is with the fans. So the fans are developing the Q&A knowledge store with me. And as it goes through a process of, we have the Q&A, the fan goes in and edits something that's like a digestible form. And then the team go in and check it for format. And then I okay it or edit it for how I'd actually like to see it. And sometimes it has links or maybe soon pictures and videos, etc. And then that goes back into the knowledge store. So it's early days and we have not even 100 Q&As yet, but there's tons of backlog stuff. And now we're just starting to help. The fans are just starting to reach out, and we're training them to contribute. And then every single contribution that happens, just like in Wikipedia, they're registered and connected to that work, so that when people want to find out who answered that, it wasn't just me. It was 4 or 5 people, and Imogen at the moment is answering in the we form, which is really annoying quite a lot of my fans, because they're like, how could you answer like when we had a baby, when I'm talking about Scout? So it's quite fun to explore what the AI is and what it could be already. That's the whole point really, is just to explore what AI is and where I feel comfortable, where I don't feel comfortable, and just having a chance to, just kind of be interested in that space, have a reason.
So I want to move on from that with another segue to steal from Alex. But before I do that, because you very conveniently put it in there, so your daughter Scout, when we chatted, in order to invite you to come on Uplink, you mentioned that one of her middle names is Rosie, and that she was born at the end of 2014. So I took that as affirmation that was linked, of course, to Rosetta, which it is. So that for the space fans out there, I think that we had many people who did amazing things. I'm not sure I've come across anybody though. I think the first person that named their child after Rosetta. Maybe.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I'm sure there must be loads of others.
But it's astonishing, really. I think I know it sounds a little bit trite, but we've always been so flattered at ESA by people changing their careers, and that's not just children saying I now want to be a space scientist, but we had lawyers who said I'm giving this all up. I want to go back in and go to university again, on the back of a robot somewhere out in the solar system. So
well, it's just such an amazing feat of engineering and human, exploration, and just the pinnacle, of everything that humans are was right then, so it's just couldn't ignore it, and it's really, really super exciting.
Yeah. Well, at some point we'll have to get you to come and see. Of course, the real Rosetta is now unfortunately crashed on the comet, but we do have a full-scale engineering model that we used, and we have that available. So at some point you and Scout will have to come and visit that when we can reopen things again.
Amazing.
But that also provides me to jump off for the point I wanted to make, because of course technology can be subverted. So I'm just sort of wondering whether any of your fans has gone in and tried to hack Imogen and make Imogen say things that perhaps you wouldn't be comfortable with. But without answering that, I'm sort of curious, because it takes us to the other things that you're involved in now, which have this kind of mixed reputation, at least broadly in the general public. Things like blockchain and cryptocurrencies and NFTs. So let's talk a little bit about that now, because you've just jumped into that sphere as well. At least with the NFTs, you've been in the blockchain thing for a while. So talk to us about what the motivation for that was, and how you're applying those technologies that people don't think of necessarily in terms of in music.
Yeah. Well, it started actually with Scout again. I was 3 months into motherhood, and I just finished a song called Tiny Human. Guess what that was about? And it was actually a commission from Sennheiser, and I naively took on the job thinking, oh yeah, 3 months in, I'll have loads of time. I'll be totally down with motherhood. Scout will be super quiet. I didn't know it was a he or she. And I'll have loads of time to make music because she'll be sleeping all the time. That was not the case. She was completely not the case. She had terrible colic, and it was horrendous for like 6 months. Anyway, everything's obviously fine now, but it was quite traumatic. And I wasn't prepared for that as a person, who'd just been used to completely living in autonomy and doing exactly what I want all the time, to the point where I could do anything that I wanted, at any second of the day. So I desperately tried to make this song. Anyway, it was a very important point in my life, and for many reasons. And I wasn't prepared to let that song just go up onto the internet in the usual way and create problems for itself, in that, the payment situation is super slow. The data is never intact about who played on that song. There's no credits. We didn't see any credits on Spotify at the time. And I just felt like I'm just not putting any money into marketing this song. Because I was paid quite handsomely by Sennheiser. So there's also that. I was like, well, I don't need to be paid by this song. Not that it would ever come to the amount that, because, we all know the figures for streaming. So I thought, rather than put out tons of money trying to market this new song, because that's the only way that you might return any money, is if you actually spend money on it, but then you don't actually ever make that money back. So I was like, instead, I want to put my money into developing technologies that are going to help this space, because I'm just fed up and frustrated with it. But that came after a discussion with my friend Zoe Keating, who's this brilliant woman, composer, cellist, data architect, and great speaker and mother and all kinds of things. And she told me about this thing called blockchain, because I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just put a song out there and the song would have all the information it ever needs, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. You could just put it up on the internet and it would just be like, everything you need to know, the beacon of, like, the oracle of data about that song. Should anyone want to interface with it, license it, sample it, whatever. That was my dream. And she was like, well, there's this technology called blockchain. Have you heard about it? And we started to talk about it, and I got super inspired. And I realized that this is the opportunity that we have, like groundbreaking technology, where we could dare to think of a new reality for the music space, in terms of rights, in terms of licensing, in terms of like ease of payment, in terms of acknowledgement, being able to hook back to the originator to be able to sort out so many problems, not in of itself obviously, because it's just a bunch of code, but in of the application of, and because there was such a rush of excitement around blockchain, and there still is, it's lasted a long time, which is great because it's amazing. It was the chance, as a musician who had sometimes moaned about the industry, in public, but really not really had the breath to do it anymore. And so many musicians over 100 years of recording music have done that. But what has it achieved? Not a lot. But with this new shiny technology, there's all kinds of opportunity to bring people outside of the space and to be excited about it, because there's a chance to rethink it. Not even to like slash and burn, which a lot of people thought I wanted to do, but just to augment the space, to make it efficient, to make it sustainable, to make it work, to have less fat in the system. So that's what got me excited. And about a few months after I discovered blockchain, which was actually exactly 6 years ago in May, I set up a hack weekend in Shoreditch for a few days. And it was there that a group called Ujo Music, who are part of Consensus on the Ethereum blockchain, we released Tiny Human, and it was the first song to use smart contracts. And it was deeply exciting. And, it had the artwork, it had the credits, it had splits, and it was very cool. And we were all very happy with ourselves. And it started a great conversation that hasn't ended. in my career. That spark of imagination with Zoe changed my life.
So, as I guess,
Alex, go ahead.
Sorry, I mean, if I could just interject, I mean, this is fascinating because it's also incredibly timely as well, just in terms of just like the news in the last week and so on, where I've seen blockchain go from something that you would read about in Wired, maybe, to something that is now front page news, obviously, as a consequence of cryptocurrency and everything else that's happening. As an observer, and I guess I mean, if you talk about 6 years, I mean, just like that is you are a proper veteran to the this world of innovation and so on. What do you think when you kind of see the responses that it is provoking now, and the kind of dialogue that it's also entered into? Because obviously cryptocurrency at the moment is reported on every day, just because it is transforming in ways. I mean, what do you make of all that? What's your perspective?
I am obviously really even more excited, and I always find that in that space, in the space with the people that are developing these tools, I find open doors for discussion, for open doors which we don't have in the industry as we have it now. So there's this kind of, on one side, we're trying to launch this digital identity for music makers called the Creative Passport, which was the kind of the spawn of that was Tiny Human. We realized that music artists, music makers, doesn't have to be an artist, it could be an engineer, any of the above. There was no way for you to play a part in that future in any organized, sensible way, unless you had an identity, a verified identity that you could always link to various different services, to your existing work in the existing world, and to be ready for the future. And trying to bring that into the industry as it is now has been incredibly hard. And I'm very excited about the current kind of bustle, especially around DAOs, that we can really start to rethink in a huge way, and people can become a part of that. That it's that I heard it today, just the passion economy, that idea that you can put money in what you believe in and take an active part in it really easily. And people are kind of cropping, these doors are cropping up where people are coming to get DAOs are cropping up, where people are collectively getting together and formulating, this is what we believe in, this is what we want to do, and we're going to go and do it. And they find funding and they go and make a thing happen. And that's so exciting. And I really hope that that music makers can do that, whether it's with Creative Passport or whatever. But this is the time. Like, it feels like creatives have the chance to scope out their future and play a part in that development. And it's now, and it's very exciting. So I'm super happy. Yes, there are negatives around the environmental impact of most of the blockchain space. But this is a very, early young space, and it will change, and it has that trajectory. It's never going to exist like nothing is going to exist on the planet unless it does make sense for the planet. And it's such an early stage of development that it can get there very quickly. So I have deep hope for it, and yeah, I'm happy to be back in it. That's part of the reason why I launched my own NFTs, was like, I just want to understand a space again, because I've been out of it for such a while, been doing other things.
So let's talk about that, because of course, as you said, things like Bitcoin, using the electricity of a medium-sized country, and it's being done with dirty energy, maybe in China, and so and it's also in some ways as a currency, there's this sort of political tie-up with libertarianism and anarchy and break free, and now you've got major banks saying, well, we're going to have our own cryptocurrencies at country level, and so there's all sorts of questions politically about what that means. But I think, again, it's important to separate that from the other aspects of blockchain, and so there are positives and there are negatives, and NFTs in a weird way in the last few months have brought those two things together, haven't they? Because on one hand, somebody makes a photograph and can sell it. What are you actually selling? And sell it for many millions. I mean, what is that? That's just speculation, surely. That's just a bubble of some kind. And yet you've done something very different with your first NFT in order to sort of re-identify, it doesn't have to be that way, right? So talk us what you've done.
Yeah, well, there are like massive numbers when you come to the artwork, people's artwork, and recently Edward Snowden's NFT, 5 million, that was bought together with a DAO of people. So yeah, there are crazy numbers out there, but for like 99.9999% of us, that's not the situation. We're just like super happy to be able to create a piece of work and sell it to the person who wants to buy it without the need for all these different places in between. And there's this kind of patronage that's happening, this support, this again, the passion economy. It's like, I believe in you and I believe in your artwork. Here's some cash. And with that space, you can do so much with an NFT. I mean, you can create unlockables. There's actually no regulation really around it right now. So it's super fun, because soon enough, the labels are going to get on it and the publishers and everyone's going to want a piece. And then it's going to get really slow again, just like it did with MP3. There was mp3.com, I discovered later in life that people could just directly, when you sold an MP3, that you directly receive the money. Imagine such a crazy thing as that. But then much later, the labels and the publishers and the collection societies were like, wait a minute, this is not right. We need to have a part of this. So they created all these barriers or helpful tools to get music makers to get that money. But it's very slow and not a lot of incentive for them to always get it right. Because if they can't find who to pay, then of course, where does it go? Back in their pockets. So we need a different conversation, and this is that beginning. And I think it's really exciting and empowering for artists to explore this space. It's very hard to navigate. I found it extremely hard to navigate, and I probably made some bad decisions along the way. But you just have to get stuck in if you're slightly intrigued and be prepared to mess it up. But you can read and read and read about stuff till the cows come home. But actually, when you just go in and start to do it, you realize there's lots of things that you can do, lots of new services cropping up, things I'm learning about all the time. And that's not going to be my last set of NFTs. I'm already thinking about the next one and the next one. And then I'm discovering these like NFT galleries and this thing called the NFT Oasis, where you can go in and look at the NFTs before in a forest while picking up a virtual rabbit, and do a concert in that space and jam with thousands of people around the world at the same time. There's like all these converging technologies, kind of interlacing. And it's just so fun. It feels really fun. I heard Holly Herndon say in their podcast, someone said it, the internet just feels fun again. And that's true. It's like, wow, let's get creative. Let's explore and share and help each other. There's so much of that happening, lots of support, not this sense of competition at all. Just like, let's help each other lift ourselves out of this space.
So, conscious that we have many people listening who may not know exactly how an NFT works, talk us through what it is that you actually made available and what it means to have, quote, bought it. I mean, to have paid money for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I take the point about you saying, it's providing support direct to the artist. I suppose at some point they may choose to resell that, but what are they actually reselling? It's not like I have a painting in my house which nobody else can see because I've bought it and I own it. That's not how it works, is it?
No, but it is kind of like that as well, because you have that painting, but other people might have photocopies of it. But you have the original piece. You paid money for that. You have a certificate which says you own that, and that's something that you can resell yourself. That's the huge difference, is that you may have MP3s of me, but you can't resell it. You may have been there as an early fan. It's like, if you were there in like one of my first concerts and you got that Imogen Heap t-shirt, you can go and sell that, but there's only a few of them in the world. And that's creating that scarcity in the digital space. That's what this is. It's creating that kind of something tangible about digital, where you can collect things and you can't copy them exactly, because there's a trail to say who you bought it from and what you paid for it. So essentially it's like, it's the social awareness that Don Diablo bought my first NFT. Woo, how cool am I? So he's this awesome musician and DJ, and he's like had a hugely successful NFTs, and he worked very, very hard and long on them, about a year. And, in the millions, kind of, I think it was 1 million, sold his first NFT. In like to give a bit of perspective, I sold mine for 2 ether, which was, is like $4,000 or $5,000 or something now. And it was really hard to do, actually. We had to get somebody who knew about the space, and we had to, well, I didn't. It's quite complicated, this situation. I'll try and briefly explain, if you like, how it happened. Yeah. So a lot of people had been like, Imogen, you were like right there in the beginning in terms of music and blockchain. You should do an NFT. And this was like 6 months before I released my NFT. And I was like, what's that? Because I hadn't been in the picture. And they were like, oh my God, okay, it's this thing. And I'm blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that sounds quite like what we did 6 years ago, but not the same, because we didn't have a receipt. There wasn't a token, no unlockables, anything like that. So lots of people were like, Imogen, you've got to do this. You're going to earn loads of money because you're going to be one of those artists. So I was like, okay, well, I'd love to earn loads of money for the Creative Passport, because I can't fund that anymore. So it's all to raise money. But then the person that I chose to do it with, actually 2 people, was Tim Exile, who's this brilliant mind, creator of Endless with 3 S's, an app that I use all the time, music creation app, community music making, like Clubhouse with music. So there's different rooms and you go in and you just make music together. It's super cool. I love it. Anyway, so they have these little things called riffs. They're 7 seconds long sometimes, or 10 seconds long. And it's just a moment in time of improvisation with a bunch of other people. And it's not a song, it's just capturing flow, essentially. It's like the seed of a song that could be something in the future. So anyway, so we sold 6, we have 6 of these, we sold 4. One of them was to Don Diablo, very kind of him, and he might make a song out of it. So who knows what that NFT may be worth in the future. If he does, it might end up being something that, because of the fact that he's made a song out of it, then his original NFT will have grown in value. So it's about, I guess, there's somebody else called Pranksy who just bought 3 out of 6 of them. He's a very big collector of NFTs, and originally it was going, he was going for 1, and I was like, look, I don't want to let it go for 1. It has to go for 2 because I'm trying to raise money. He was like, okay, I'll buy it for 2. So we bought 3 of them for 2, which is very kind. And now we've got a couple left. So what he's bought is the recognition that he's bought the NFT. So he's there on the blockchain as the buyer, and so is Don Diablo. Actually, what he can do with it is a bit grey area. And that's what I like about it. It's like, there is no definition in the contract. There's no contract at the moment. There will be in the future. All I've put on in the metadata was that will go along with it are the writers, the creators of that piece of music. So they get 25%. So I'm sharing with other people that we made it. 45% goes to the Creative Passport. 5% goes to Nori, which is a carbon capture company based in the States that basically gives money to farmers to kind of compensate them for specific soil that's better at capturing carbon, better all round. So it's direct. My funding is directly paying a farmer, which is like super cool. It kind of bringing it into the real space. It's not offsetting it. It's kind of actually going to a farmer who is actually capturing carbon. And we ended up doing 100 times because they got 5%, and they got whatever it was, 1.1 ether. They essentially got, I think I took out 20 tons of carbon, and each NFT is about 0.2 of a ton of carbon. So anyway, it's just, you can do what you like in the space. There's so many different people are doing other things. I kind of didn't get that creative in a way because I just wanted to see what we could do in the beginning. But we have all kinds of plans about ones in the future. So I would just suggest, if you're a musician listening, or an artist or a photographer or whatever, start exploring the space. If you want to see a change in the way that your industry works, this is a real chance to start, moving the needle.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this is an interesting thing. I mean, we've had many musical guests on, both at our physical events and also, on Uplink. And the question of intellectual property comes up very frequently, perhaps as it should. And, it's one of those things, though. You said something not long ago about the internet is fun again, perhaps, that's the interesting thing that we do take for granted at times. while chatting with you on this teleconferencing system, which is streaming to the internet, which is
Mm-hmm.
universally available to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection in a country that allows YouTube. I instantly messaged my colleague, Mr. Burrows, in the background to look up the indistinguishable quote about magic. So he entered into a portal of information, found it instantaneously, and then beamed it back to me so I could tell you that Arthur C. Clarke in 1962 said that any sufficiently advanced technology will be indistinguishable from magic. And that's magic right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So while we've lived through many historic times for innovation, what really strikes me is that now, and I talked to Mark about this, about space exploration, it feels like we're in a radically innovative time right now. I mean, from Rosetta to so many current missions, there is so much happening, but it feels like in the world of tech and innovation, this doubling seems to be accelerating, because it just feels like it's just assumed that those gloves that you have developed will no longer look like gloves in a few years. It's almost just inevitable that we can almost see these science fiction realities emerging as our realities now. And I wonder, do people always feel that way, or are we just in a unique time of pivoting, of acceleration, because it feels that way sometimes?
Yeah, maybe, Leonardo da Vinci imagining helicopters and flying machines and all kinds of things, catapults. And, he was like 1,000 years ahead of his time, or I don't exactly know when he was around, but it feels like hundreds of years. So, perhaps that space is getting smaller and smaller from the imagination to the conception, is getting smaller and smaller and thinner, till eventually, I was just been hearing about Yuval Noah Harari on a podcast, discussing where we meet a point of we can't imagine past the singularity, essentially, and that beyond the integration of AI, or where AI gets smarter than us, we can't imagine past that, because then it takes on a whole different space. So perhaps we're accelerating to that point. But it does feel extremely exciting, but also deeply overwhelming, which is why more and more I feel like I need the help of an AI to help me navigate into this space and kind of welcoming in that singularity. It is exciting. I mean, I have spent the last year actually feeling not very excited about anything, because it's been so hard to do things, because we haven't been able to physically meet up. And I don't know if it's just a coincidence, but since the lockdown has eased here, there's just this sense of the lockdown has eased everywhere. The lockdown of ideas is no longer. And, I am discovering so many conversations, and I'm really hyped up about the future of the space, and hearing, people in the industry, in the music industry, the little world, that they are also like, what, this is a big shift. This is like MP3s again. This is, what are we going to do? This is these NFTs, like slightly about them. And I just hope we don't get it wrong again. They went about it the wrong way last time. They were late, they didn't believe it, they didn't know what to do, and they clamped down on it in a bad way, and we're really far away from where we could have been if they'd brought in good people and good minds. We wouldn't have that disassociation between the people who made the music and the music itself. There's this like massive gap. It's just like stream of background music and no real connection anymore. So yeah, I don't think we're going to get it wrong, because I think the difference now is that we have the agency with blockchain and DAOs and our creating our identity space, that we will be able to shift that as a mass.
I think, it's, for me, it's slightly ironic in a way that if you think, you mentioned mp3.com, of course there was Napster, and Napster in many ways kind of kicked off this idea of music is free, music shall be, you don't have to pay for it, just download it. And then Apple came into that with iTunes and sort of said, look, we've got to find a way, firstly of monetizing, but also then with DRM of saying, making sure that it just can't be exchanged freely and stolen. And the sort of irony is that Apple has always presented itself as the artist's friend. And I'm an Apple user. I'm sitting in front of lots of Apple technology here. But it's a big corporation that's the richest in the world today. So I think that my question then is, when you say we should get it right, the one area that is not often discussed in this context is how to make it not only better for the artists, but open up representation, because it's not everybody that has either the technical skills or the equipment or the gear. I mean, are we at risk of creating a kind of a blockchain elite that remove themselves from people that, you know, scrabble to get food together? And I don't know. I mean, it's just...
I think it's the opposite. I think I just heard about Akon's coin, the A coin, that he's bringing to Africa to help people kind of navigate that space from their flip phones into the blockchain space. So I think in many ways the places where it will benefit most are the places with the least friction, the least industry, the least incumbents. Where we're going to be very slow to take up is the States and, you know, Great Britain, and where we have these organizations. So I think it's really exciting to look to places where they don't have that opportunity right now, but are actually going to make it much faster than we are with our existing incumbents. So I think it's going to, I believe that a lot of people in this space are doing it for that reason, so that there is this, for all, no top-down, grassroots kind of selection of tools that people will be able to navigate and piece things together to create that industry or that idea or that project come to life, because of this kind of like a dashboard of tools that you can like click together. I think that's going to be what we'll see, because just as much as you can have an idea and kind of invest in that idea and be registered as having an investment in that idea, that's what coders can do. You know, they can develop things and have themselves attached to that code and payment for that code. And that massively incentivizes people to do the right thing. So I think it's a super inspiring place, and it's exactly going to do the opposite.
I mean, just before I hand back to Alex, I think you talked about this, you know, business of in the last year feeling sort of a little bit insulated from that progress because we haven't been able to talk. And I was a couple of days ago thinking to myself, is there a point at which I am getting too old to accept these new ideas, so to speak? I mean, like we maybe don't accept new music. You like to think you're open-minded, but there's a point comes where you say, I can't. And I think the thing that's worried me slightly, not worried me, but is kept me away from some of these technologies, is that it's still a bit hacker. It's still a bit impenetrable in terms of the nomenclature. I mean, you get the Economist will run an article every few months trying to explain what Bitcoin is. Yeah. You read it and then you go away and you realise actually you still don't know. So it seems to me that there's still a missing layer here, which is making the technology, as Alex reminded us in the Arthur C. Clarke quote, making it seem like magic, but magic that works. I mean, these phones, right? I mean, it's got no buttons on it. And that's not how mobile phones started, right? There were bazillions of little buttons and they were a bit techie, but now people seem to know how to use it. So do you think there's work to be done perhaps in the creative space to make this, to remove the hacker ethos? Because I'm sure that puts a lot of people off, because then they're not educated enough, that's not the right word. They're not comfortable with moving into that space, but they just want it to work for them. They just want to, how is this going to help me?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely will get there, for sure. We don't talk about HTML or, servers or, TCP. We don't talk about stuff like that. Where we did in the beginning, we were like, modem, and this, what's that? And it was all like this thing that didn't make any sense. But then apps started to come about and then kind of make sense of that space. And that's what we're going to start to see. Is apps that make sense to us. There's just no user interface really at the moment. It's just a kind of bunch of code and people developing things, and it's all a bit messy. But it's like a melting pot, and eventually we'll start to see these apps. I mean, there are already apps, decentralized apps, DApps, and but with very different structures around profit and company structure and people and hierarchy, and it's just going to be different. It's almost like, again, I heard this on Holly's on Interdependence podcast, this idea that when the cat is out of the bag, that those people who contribute to such a service as Spotify, the artists and the fans, kind of realize that there's an opportunity, there's a new world where, by way of listening to it and by way of contributing your music to it, you own it together. Why would you have it any other way? Why would you put all this time and effort into a thing to give it to a small group of people at the top? That once that cat is out the bag, it'll be very hard to go back. And that is quite an exciting thought.
Very exciting thought. Before we go on, I think Mark and I are going to have a 2001 factor, because of course, it's like when you talk about the monolith, you are talking about the iPhone, really. Yeah. But that's the thing that's so interesting about this moment that we're in, because things are changing so rapidly. Douglas Adams said a great thing about technology, is that technology is what you call things that don't work very well, right? There's a certain point where a table just becomes a table. At a certain point, that was a radical technology for elevating objects to make them kind of like, whatever it might be. Books, they're just called books.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, an index was a huge innovation in the history of thought and how we know things and how we find it and all these things. And so I guess that's the thing, is there is a moment where it'll just become the thing. It won't be the technology that does the thing like the other thing, won't it? And that's what's interesting to me. I mean, generationally, I grew up, the 80s, 90s. The internet was a very cool thing. Yeah, I mean, you watch The Matrix and all that. And there's always someone on, they can just sort of type code just while talking to people, and it's all, they never mistype. There's never like, oh, you must install the driver or whatever else. It's just all these things happen.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating to me is not what's happening now, but where we may be in 10 years. Yeah. And not just in the radical departures, but also just like the simple things like you're talking about, like artists being fairly compensated for their work, things like that somehow we haven't been able to crack that nut for the last 20 years in a way, which to me is really, really exciting. And I guess you're doing a lot to not just innovate, but also extol the virtues of that. And that's what I find really, really fun and interesting, that sense of fun that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But there's at times a different side to things. When people mention AI, depending on who you're talking to, you're either thinking of AI like, wow, this, Google anticipated my search. This is, or you're thinking about like headless dog robots learning how to walk up walls, or, Boston Dynamics are genius. Is technology, I guess it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It always is, but is it moving so quickly now that we can't really bridle what it is to ensure that it isn't moving too far? I mean, maybe I'm being too science fiction, but at times I do wonder and I do worry.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. We are we're lagging behind, aren't we? We have these primitive brains. And it was, again, this is Yuval, the primitive brains, medieval company structures, and then this like lightning fast moving technology, and we don't know how to deal with it. It is I myself, I feel like I'm too old for this, and I'm 43. And I really have to like dive in and understand it. But like what we said, it's just, we will have to pass things over to algorithms, won't we, and AI, and when it just becomes silly not to, because we are becoming more machine-like to do the things, when actually they just let the machines do that and let us be the conscious beings and, the drive, the direction. So maybe we can spend our time kind of developing things that will offload our human capacity to do things which machines can do really well, allowing us to contemplate consciously how we're going to deal with things that fly up in front of us, so we're not kind of blinded by the day-to-day. Perhaps that's how we'll deal with it.
So I just wondered, in that sense, is the way you were talking, is there also that it I remember my father was telling me, when I'm older than both of you, but that we're going to be moving to people working 3 days a week. We're going to be liberated by machinery and by computers. We're going to have so much more free time for being creative and just going out and enjoying life. Really hasn't happened, has it?
No. Some people manage it.
We seem to be, well, and this is, I guess that's exactly the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
To some extent, some of this technology has reinforced the basis of capitalism and hierarchy. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking, when you said maybe there'll be an app which will come along which will be decentralized. Well, not if Apple don't want it on their phone, right? I mean, I'm sort of being slightly dystopian, but is there, because at the same time as this radical shift is happening, we're also seeing radical shifts of sort of reactionary politics and Luddism, and saying, I'm not going to take that vaccine because obviously that's coming from people I don't trust anymore, whether it's politicians or it's the tech billionaires. They're going to inject me with 5G or whatever the nonsense is. I mean, in the past year, because you sit right at the nexus of that, not only as a creator of the technology and an innovator, but somebody that thinks contemplatively about creation and human beings. What's your reaction been? I mean, I don't want to be, dark and negative as we're just about to emerge from the tunnel, but it's been a kind of an interesting time, hasn't it, where society's even split even more in some sense.
Yeah, it has. And it is a dark side for sure. But it's actually, I think it's because the technology hasn't gone far enough. We're kind of being squashed into these short snippets of, attack and retaliate on Twitter or wherever. There's like the spaces that we've provided to converse with each other demand that you kind of focus on a thing that's a soundbite, and it's very, very hard to have a conversation. I've actually been really uplifted about the VR space because actually in lockdown there's been a great amount of funding going into the VR space, and I don't know if you've ever I'm sure you have put on an Oculus and kind of had a virtual meeting with someone, even though the Oculus is incredibly painful to wear, but it is really amazing to go and just liberating, just to like fly during a meeting, just go fly up into the sky, come back down, feel refreshed, continue the conversation. And I imagine, just the other day I was in a Clubhouse chat, or I was just lurking in the background listening. It was called Israelis and Palestinians, and it was, or Israel and Palestine, and it was just this conversation where lots of people were talking with each other, and it was just for the purposes of trying to kind of resolve some things in a small circle of people while what's awful is going on, and I imagine that in the VR space, and how different it is, because you can't see their faces on Clubhouse, you can't see where they're at, you can't see what they look like, can't see anything, can't see how they're gesturing, can't see whether they feel like they mean it or not. You can't see when people are feeling nervous or attacked, or the body language of that. And when you're in the VR space, even just with a headset and some controllers, you can do that. You can sense, this person's, backing away or feeling a bit, kind of angry or whatever. You can sense that even now at this very early stage. So I'm excited about what the VR space can do to bring us together, to have these conversations, to actually soften that those edges of this versus this, because when we can converse with each other more as humans and not but have that kind of virtual barrier, or that real barrier, because we're not actually in the same room, that you can feel comfortable in discussion more than you can if you are a person in a conflict area with these people over here and these people over here. You can't have that conversation. And so there's something about having that in the privacy of a private space, but being able to be yourself, that I think is really warming.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating, actually. I hadn't considered it that way. I mean, we've spent so much time doing this, right? We're all dying to go back to actually seeing people in the room, but there will be situations where, no, indeed, you can't put the people in the room. So actually doing it in virtual space may be a very positive way of bringing dialogue. So, yeah, I think that's a fascinating idea. I remember the first time I did go into virtual reality and met a person in there. It was, of all people, it was Buzz Aldrin. It was a VR experience. He wasn't there live,
okay.
but I had just been on tour with him and done live shows with him in Australia, and there he was in this thing. And it was very weird because he was just the same. It's like, I'm going to tell you how to get to Mars. This is my Mars thing, and it's like, Buzz, I've heard. I don't know. It's not real Buzz this time, but it was that kind of real. Even though it's not real, and I think you've pointed that out, right? I mean, crossing the uncanny valley is actually quite easy in VR, because if you engage your vestibular system, it takes away the fact that people look like pixels. They don't actually look like real people at all.
Yeah.
But if your vestibular system is engaged, it makes it much more real. I mean, we have I'm sure you've done it, the VR system, not the Oculus, but the HTC Vive has a demo where you can walk around mountains. And there's a particular point where you tell people in VR, in your office, on the carpet, walk over to the edge there and jump off the cliff. And nobody will, right? Because it's a cliff. I mean, as far as they can see, it doesn't look realistic, but it feels realistic. And not one person, when I was doing this a few years ago, not one person jumped off that cliff, even though they knew full well they were in my office on the carpet.
I would have definitely jumped off the cliff. They're like, what's at the bottom? My wildest dreams.
Well, I mean, look, there's so many, threads that come on, and the hour has gone by so quickly. And as we draw toward the end of the conversation, though, I just want to bring some of the people who've sat with us tonight, and joined us. And what a concept when you really think about it. So Ren has actually asked, I think, really a great question. I think we touched on it. What are the next steps for NFT? What are the problems that you would want to solve immediately?
Well, oh goodness, so many things. I suppose the first problem I want to solve is just, help solve, is the on-ramp, for anyone to just dive in, understand the space. There's not really any kind of visualization out there or kind of digestible thing that explains what each one does and what one uses, what system, and what are the pros and cons. That would be really great if somebody could do that, just to kind of help people like me not have to try and do that myself, and hundreds of thousands of other people trying to do that themselves, to visualize the space and to understand how they all interconnect and what you need to do this, some kind of map of where the space is at. And obviously it would be like growing every day, but that would be really super helpful, because then so many more people could interface with it and get stuck in, because it is very daunting. I mean, I've done one and it was really hard work, and I'm already like, I don't know what to do for the next. I mean, I don't know where to go. I've got ideas, but it's not clear to me where to go, because I don't fully understand the space.
Interesting. We have Daniela, who asks, so this is another turn. So how's making music perhaps influenced or enhanced your sense of spirituality in your life? How has your work widened the world?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it just gives you a chance. It gives you an excuse to just go down, in the wormholes, down the garden path, just explore and imagine and think how things could be different. That's your job, to imagine and to conjure up stories from things that have happened or things that you hope to happen, to tell stories. And spirituality comes into that hugely. Who am I? What am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? Am I conscious? Am I not conscious? All kinds of things. So yeah, I feel like I'm lucky that I can tap into those questions often.
Very good, very good. And I guess a final one. Is there some curiosity about the chair that you're sitting in, and all that? And I think that one of the most fascinating things, that we've explored tonight, is something we talked about so nonchalantly. Where is it all going, and is this something that's going to be available to people? This AI,
the chair,
AR.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with it. I mean, this is early days. The gloves again started out as a passion project, just to kind of want to do things differently, to just get my hands, on the system without having to touch it. The creative passport sparked out frustration of just like, I want to do things differently in this space. I want to make life easier. Obviously 10 years of making it more difficult for myself, but eventually making it easier. And with the chair, it's about feeling overwhelmed with the amount of interactions online and not really feeling like I'm anywhere or being able to really be there for people, and missing out the questions that are really important and not being able to find out how to. I wanted to create a space, a kind of safe space with my fans, where I can really talk deeply about things, because I felt like I was hugely missing that in this like tiny little snatches of conversation online. I didn't really know who people were, and it just didn't feel comfortable. Um, and so now it's this very safe space where we can explore and converse, and they've helped me get through the lockdown, you know. So I would love if this eventually turned into something that people could have at home. I don't know in what form, or you know, but yeah, like how to, maybe you would traverse through the virtual landscapes in here, but you'd need your legs. But maybe, you know, it's just a nice place to listen to music, or to watch films. But yeah, kind of developing our own AIs. I think it's, for me, it feels very comforting to know that we are getting having an understanding of what that means, very just on the surface, but just having the discussion feels less scary than not having the discussion. And so I don't know what's going to come from it in the end, but ask me again in kind of 3 years' time, because that seems to be the timeline. Already we've kind of moved into phase 2, which is developing Justin Butler, who's the kind of lead of the listening chair, the AI tech. He's just now started with Rasa, this kind of kind of AI engine that he's kind of plopping things into, whereas before we were using Watson as the engine, but it did some things to a certain part, but basically wasn't being developed for us, obviously. So now we've gone, okay, well that does that. Let's do what we need now that we know what we need. So 3 years from now is the time when usually it might become something that other people can use. But this is a big thing, so I don't know what it'll end up being. Maybe a program to help people develop their own personal AIs for music. Who knows?
Well, let me sort of jump in and remind everybody who's listening, and you, of course, Imogen, is that Uplink has been this thing we've been doing for about a year. But before that, we were doing live events, bringing musicians and scientists and engineers and writers and creatives together to meet with the public and talk to the public and perform music, but also have these kind of conversations. And of course, we'd love to continue this conversation with you in that context as well, because we have had lots of ambitions about doing more than just here's a gig, right? We're just playing music and people listen. How do we make Space Rocks more interactive? And, you know, we'd love to have you at the nexus of that, because it's clear you've thought extensively and not only thought about it, but done it. So as things progress, as we come back out, I mean, I'm a bit envious of you two, because you're in a country which is, well, hopefully coming out of lockdown and staying out. We'll see. I'm in the Netherlands, where things are a bit behind, so I'm not traveling yet. But maybe by the beginning of next year, we'll have the opportunity for another live event, and we'd just love to have you involved.
Sure. Keep in touch.
We will do.
Absolutely. And well, Mark, I thought you were going to enact our tradition.
Well, yes.
As we draw to a close, Imogen, before you go, we have one last thing to ask of you.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's a dexterity test as much as anything else. So space and rocks together. So there you go. So thanks very much, Imogen. It's been a massive pleasure meeting you this evening.
Thank you.
And, we'd love to be in touch, and thank you for being so willing to share with us this evening.
Yeah, pleasure. Been a joy. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Well then, Mark, we solved the world's problems. Well done. Happy B-Day.
Yes, exactly. Maybe I should go back to anybody that's in late. Maybe we shall have Happy World. Where was it again? Yes. Well, no. Look, that was a great conversation. There we go. It's World B Day. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, there are many things which I've thought about, you know, with respect to NFTs and blockchain and Bitcoin, and really haven't had the time to engage. So talking to Imogen about it from her perspective, you know, as you heard, she's not per se a technologist, but she wants to create using technology and draws people in. And I felt very drawn in to what she was talking about. There's a lot for me to go and explore and try to understand.
As did I. I think that one of the things I was struck by is, because I think, crypto, blockchain, and so many of those things have become so almost commandeered by, just, I think, an unpalatable kind of tech bro, a recklessness and all that. You forget that it has other applications, other uses as well, things that we hope will create a fairer system, things that can perhaps rebalance imbalances that exist, not just in artist compensation, but also even economic systems. So who knows where it will lead. But one thing is for sure, I think Imogen is going to be right there at the spear point, because she said she's juggling a lot of projects. She has a lot going on, and so we'll have to have her back.
Yeah, no, big thrill to meet with her and talk to her. And we didn't even really talk much about music. That's fascinating too. I mean, she said she's not creating so much music, but there's a huge amount I would recommend people go and listen to. But yeah, there's a really, really interesting interface there with the technologies that we see in our everyday lives and how they can be applied for good. It's the ideal, maybe it's utopian, but hey, look, you've got to have people standing at the vanguard, people who are ambassadors for that, doing it the right way. And I think Imogen's definitely right up there.
Yeah, I fully agree. Well, thanks so much to everyone for joining, and Mark, as ever, an absolute pleasure to see you.
Yeah, great pleasure. We'll see you soon. Nothing scheduled at the moment, but we will be back soon enough. Bye-bye.